My name is Arabelle Monroe. I'm 36 years old and used to be the strategic operations director at one of the largest logistics companies on the West Coast. After taking 3 approved days off to bury my father, I returned to the office before sunrise. But what waited for me wasn't a warm welcome or condolences. It was a cold termination email, effective immediately. No meeting. No warning. Just 3 days. 3 days to say goodbye to the most important man in my life, and lose the career I had built over 7 years. Have you ever been betrayed by the very place you once called family? Share your story in the comments. Hit like if you've ever been treated unfairly, and don't forget to subscribe so we can walk through what came after that fall. Because this journey isn't about revenge, it's about rising and leading. I set my leather bag down beside my desk, my hand trembling slightly even though I tried to appear calm. The screen of my laptop was still glowing, displaying the cold subject line like a loaded gun pointed at my chest. I quietly shut the laptop, took a deep breath, and stood. The early office lights were still dim, with only a sliver of dawn light pressing against the glass wall behind me, as if mocking the bitter moment with gentle indifference. I opened my drawer and took out the old cardboard box I'd kept, just in case. I never thought today would be that day. Each time I folded a small object into the box, it felt like I was folding away pieces of the 7 years I'd lived here. A photo of the whole team from our retreat last year on the Oregon coast, where we laughed so hard our stomachs hurt after Ethan dropped an entire tray of grilled fish into the sand. A handwritten thank you note from Emily, the intern from that year, now a regional manager on the East Coast. I still remembered her shaky handwriting. "You were the first person who made me believe I could do this." I picked up the tiny cactus in the corner of my desk, a Christmas gift from the team 2 years ago. The light green ceramic pot was chipped. Rachel had dropped it once while cleaning, but I never let anyone throw it away. I loved that imperfection. It was part of this place. Part of us. I heard footsteps approaching from a distance. I didn't turn around. But Zoe's voice was unmistakable. "Arabelle, what's going?" She stopped mid-sentence when she saw the cardboard box in my face. I looked up, trying to keep my voice steady. I was let go. "What?" Zoe's eyes widened, her voice breaking in shock. "No way. You just got back from your father's funeral." I nodded slightly. 3 approved days of leave. And this is how they thanked me. She stepped closer, gripping the edge of the desk, her face flushed with anger. "Who signed off on this? Was it Richard?" I didn't answer. But Zoe already knew. A single tear slid down her cheek. "This is so wrong." Then Ethan walked in, holding his usual paper cup of coffee, eyes still groggy. But when he saw me packing, his expression froze. "Where are you going?" I paused a few seconds before answering. "I don't work here anymore." Ethan looked at me, then the box. "You're kidding." I shook my head, softening my gaze. "I wish I were." He set his coffee down like it was the only thing he could control in that moment. "They've lost it. You're the one holding this entire system together. You just closed a $3 million deal with Kane Tech. Are they out of their minds?" I didn't know how to respond. I just bent down and continued wrapping the framed photo in tissue paper. A few more people started to gather. Rachel looked hesitant. Miguel didn't say a word, but I could see his fists clenched tightly. In the heavy silence, a voice rang out behind us, monotone and hollow. "We need people who can be more flexible with the company's demands." I didn't have to turn around to recognize Richard's voice. Same calculated tone, same empty courtesy, like reading lines from a corporate script. I turned to face him. No rage. No spite. I just looked him in the eye so he could see all the disappointment I had held in for far too long. "I hope you remember this moment, Richard," I said slowly, every word deliberate. "You didn't just lose an employee. You shattered the trust one had in this place." Richard smirked but said nothing. Maybe he didn't think I had the nerve to speak like that in front of everyone. Maybe he didn't understand that I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to speak at the right time. A minute later, he walked away without another word. I bent down and placed the photo frame in the box beside the tiny cactus, which had survived 2 winters with no one caring for it. No one in the group spoke while I packed the rest of my things. But their eyes said everything. Bigger. And something deeper. A sense of loss, as if someone had ripped away the foundation they had stood on. As I walked out of the room, Rachel softly said behind me, "If you ever need us, we're here." I turned back and looked at the team. They didn't have to come with me. But I knew something had broken inside them too. Not because I was fired, but because of how easily loyalty was discarded. I didn't say anything, just nodded. Then I walked away. No one escorted me. But no one turned away either. And that was enough for me. I stepped into the HR office with the cardboard box in hand. No one accompanied me. No footsteps behind. Only the silence of a hallway I had walked hundreds of times as a leader. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was cold and overly bright, as if designed to strip emotion from the space. Lauren Kent sat behind the desk, pen in hand, eyes locked on a folder as if rereading it would somehow make everything easier. She was someone I used to trust. We had lunch together every Friday. We shared family stories. We even cried in the break room once when she learned her mother was diagnosed with cancer. But that morning she couldn't meet my eyes. I pulled out a chair and sat down. No one spoke for the first few seconds. Only the soft rustle of paper and the click of her pen filled the room. I studied Lauren's face, rigid like carved wood, except her eyes couldn't hide the guilt. "This is the severance agreement," she finally said, voice mechanical like it had been memorized. "Includes 2 weeks' pay, a non-disparagement clause, and a 6-month non-compete." I nodded slightly. "Anything else?" She hesitated. "Just 3 signature spots. I'll send you a copy by email after." I picked up the pen but didn't write. For the first time since entering the room, I looked her straight in the eyes. "Lauren, whose decision was this?" My question dropped like a stone into still water. Lauren blinked, her fingers tightening around the pen, her lips pressing into a thin line. I didn't say another word. I just waited. "This isn't easy to say," she began, her voice faltering. "I'm not asking for excuses. I'm asking who signed off." Lauren looked up, finally meeting my gaze. And then, as if she couldn't hold it back anymore, she blurted it out. "Richard," she said softly. "He needed that role. For his sister." I sat still. Her words didn't hit me like a punch. They cut through like ice, silent, sharp, and all too familiar. Lauren quickly looked down as if regretting that she had said too much. But it was already too late. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice dropping. "Charlotte Weaver. She just transferred from the Denver office. MBA from Columbia." Richard said. "She needed a senior-level position to start off here. And I was the easiest seat to remove." Lauren didn't answer. He didn't need to. I let out a short laugh, picked up the pen, and signed each of the marked spots. My hand didn't shake, but my heart felt like it had been pulled down to the bottom of a cold river. I used to work 60 hours a week. Turned down offers from 3 other companies because I believed North Bay was a place where I could make a real difference, I said without looking at her. I was never late, never missed a single deadline. I stayed here the entire time Richard disappeared for 2 months to deal with his personal issues. I managed the entire Northwest project by myself. And for one funeral, I was discarded. Lauren didn't argue, didn't defend. She just stayed silent. And in that silence, I saw more clearly than any explanation. This place I had poured myself into had become nothing more than a game of power, one I was never even invited to play. I closed the folder and slid it back across the desk. "Thank you for being honest. Even if it's late." Lauren let out a shaky breath. "Arabelle, I didn't want this to happen. I really didn't." I stood, lifted the cardboard box off the chair. "Neither did I. But we don't always get to choose what comes. We only get to choose how to face it." I turned to leave, my hand gripping the box handle like it was the last thread holding up my dignity. Behind me, I heard Lauren's voice, soft like wind slipping through a cracked door. "Arabelle, if there's anything I can do." I paused at the doorway but didn't turn around. "Be braver for the next person they try to push out. Don't stay quiet like you did this time." The door clicked shut behind me, sealing off a room filled with bright light, but empty of any warmth. I walked on, carrying not just a cardboard box, but the first hard lesson of life after betrayal. 1 week after I left North Bay, my apartment in Portland still sat quiet, reflecting the unsettled quiet inside me. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't play music. I just let the natural light drift in, letting it illuminate more of the sounds inside my own mind. Faces from the past floated through my thoughts. People I had mentored, worked with, shared laughs and late-night crisis calls. But from them, I expected nothing. I understood how corporate worlds worked. When someone falls, the others stay silent to protect their own position. But that Friday morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. The first text came from Rachel. "Arabelle, I'm sorry I didn't say anything then. But I can't stay silent anymore." Then Ethan, "The analytics system is a mess. Richard's blaming our team, but it's clearly due to lack of coordination." In just 2 hours, I received over 10 messages from former team members. Zoe shared that the Pacific Wind contract was now stalled because the client refused Richard's proposal. Miguel said logistics lacked clear direction and the shipping teams were no longer aligned. Rachel messaged again, this time a longer note. "They told us not to contact you. But we can't pretend you never existed. You were the one holding us together. Now everyone's just looking out for themselves." I sat quietly, reading each line with a heaviness in my chest. Not out of regret, but because I could feel what we had built slowly unraveling. Not because of a lack of skill, but a loss of trust. That afternoon, a strange email landed in my personal inbox. No sender name. Just a temporary email address, untraceable. The subject line, "Don't let them keep lying." I hesitated for a few seconds before opening it. Attached was a file, North Bay's internal financial report from the last quarter. But more importantly, there was a supplemental budget proposal labeled board copy, with nearly a $2 million discrepancy compared to the version sent company-wide. I opened both documents side by side, every number bolded. A listed expense labeled Marketing Expansion Northwest Region was, in truth, a transfer to a consulting firm. A quick search revealed that the firm was owned by Richard's family. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tightening. I had suspected Richard wasn't clean. But I never imagined he would go as far as pushing me out just to cover up a dishonest financial scheme. Another message popped up. This time from Rachel. "Client from Kane Tech specifically asked for you. They won't sign a new contract unless they speak to the person who ran the supply chain last year." As I read, something stirred inside me, part sorrow, part strange certainty. I had left quietly, taking nothing with me but my own integrity. But apparently what I left behind still lingered clearly in the eyes of those who had worked with me. An hour later, a call came from an unknown number. I didn't plan to answer. But something in me did. "Arabelle," a familiar voice said from the other end, slightly breathless. It was Zoe. "I'm sorry for calling. But there's something you need to know." I straightened up. My tone dropped. "What is it?" "Richard's placed Charlotte in your position. But she doesn't know how to lead. No one on the team trusts her. Rachel's being forced to train her from scratch. They treat you like you never existed, but they're still using your name to present to clients." I let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "They're using my shadow to sell while tossing me out like a stain." Zoe hesitated. "If you're planning something new, even just thinking about it, please tell us. Not all of us want to keep pretending we don't see." I froze. I'd never planned revenge. But in that moment, I realized something had been quietly simmering. Faith from those who had once followed me hadn't died. It had only been blocked by fear. Maybe if I was the first to walk through the wall, they'd find the way out too. So I opened my laptop and saved the financial file I'd just received. I didn't send it anywhere. I didn't act. But dragging weak, I didn't feel alone anymore. Even if they were forced into silence, their hearts still called the name of the one who once led them. And that, though small, was enough to start imagining something far bigger. I was making tea in the small kitchen when my phone buzzed on the stone counter. The screen displayed a name I never expected to see under these circumstances. Marshall Brooks. I hesitated a few seconds. Not because I was unsure, but because that name brought me back to the logistics summit in Seattle last year when he, the CEO of Everlin X Logistics, had walked straight up to my table, shook my hand and said, "You're doing great work at North Bay. But if you ever get tired of people not appreciating real talent, give me a call." I had laughed back then, politely declined. But apparently the offer had never really closed. I hit accept. "Arabelle." His voice came through, steady and direct. "I heard you left North Bay." I replied calmly, "News sure travels fast." "It's not just news," he said, "it's aftershocks." I didn't respond. A moment of silence passed before he continued. Are you ready to shake up the market? I gave a slight chuckle. Are you calling to offer me a job or just to compliment the way I got fired? Both, Marshall said. But mostly to talk business. I have a leadership role open. Vice President of Western Operations. Can you meet me? I glanced out the window where early fall sunlight fell across deep green trees. When? Tomorrow. Portland office. The next morning I stepped into Everlyn X's glass building along the Willamette River. Unlike the cold and quiet atmosphere at North Bay, this place was bright, lively, full of laughter echoing down the left corridor. The walls were decorated with real-time analytics displays and photos of actual working teams, not hollow slogans. The receptionist, her curly hair gently pinned back, greeted me with a warm smile and invited me to the fourth floor where Marshall was waiting. His office wasn't large, but it was neat and understated. When I entered, he was standing by the window with his back to the room, seemingly taking in the view of the city. Thanks for coming, he said as he turned and shook my hand. You still carry that same calm energy I saw the first time we met. I've been practicing, I replied with a faint smile. We sat at a small meeting table in the corner of the room. No small talk. No fluff. Marshall got right to the point. I want you to run all operations across the Western region, from Seattle to San Diego. Build your own team. Design your own systems. I studied him. I just went through a pretty ugly push-out. Why do you trust me? He leaned back, fingers interlaced. Because I've been following your work for a while. Your reports, your system overhauls at North Bay, they weren't just impressive, they were sustainable. I'm not hiring you to get back at them. I'm hiring you because you're the best west of the Rockies. I stayed quiet for a moment. There was no bitterness left, just a mix of caution and curiosity beginning to stir. What about my non-compete? I asked. Already reviewed, he answered without missing a beat. Your contract was overly broad and likely unenforceable in court. Our legal team is ready to assist if it comes up. And if you need time to think, take the weekend. I nodded slowly. And the team? You choose, Marshall said. I want you to build it on trust, not top-down mandates. The look in his eyes wasn't that of a CEO trying to convince talent. It was someone who understood the real value of loyalty, something I'd lost in my previous job. I stood up and shook his hand again. I'll give you my answer by Monday. Then I'll wait for good news, he said, smiling. Don't let the past hold you back, Arabelle. People like you shouldn't be pushed out, they should be lifted up. I left the office with a lighter step than when I came in. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, casting golden light across the river. I slid into my car, sat still for a moment, my hand resting on the steering wheel, heartbeat slow but steady. My phone buzzed with a message from Miguel. Something's coming, isn't it? I don't know what, but it feels like you just opened a door none of them saw coming. I stared at the message, then set the phone on the passenger seat. That door was clear to me now, not just for me but for those who had once walked beside me and were still stuck behind. If I stepped through it, maybe they'd find a way to follow. Sunday afternoon, I arrived at River Bloom, a familiar cafe by the river where we'd once held farewell parties and informal group meetings on deadline-heavy evenings. But today no one there worked at North Bay anymore. And I wasn't sure what I'd find behind that glass door. I arrived 10 minutes early. Autumn air skimmed the river, carrying a hint of cinnamon from the little market across the bridge. I chose a corner table by the window, ordered a hot black tea, rested my hand on the wooden tabletop and exhaled a slow breath. At exactly 5 o'clock, Zoe walked in first. She was always on time, always the one who kept the team grounded, even when everyone else was unraveling. Today, her hair was pulled into a high bun, her face more serious than usual. She pulled out a chair and sat across from me. You doing okay? She asked. Better than you probably think, I replied with a soft smile. Zoe didn't hesitate. She pulled a paper from her bag and laid it on the table. I looked down. An employment confirmation letter from Everlyn X HR, digitally signed, dated today. I resigned this morning. Had my interview with Everlyn X HR around noon. I've been hired. Before I could respond, Ethan, Miguel, and Rachel walked in. They pulled chairs close together. Ethan gave my chair a light tap. Hey boss, he said, half joking. We figured you might need a crew. I stared at each of them in silence. Miguel pulled a printed letter from his backpack. Rachel nodded and showed me the email from Evelyn X on her phone. All four had moved without asking me. They had already chosen. You guys. I couldn't find the words. Zoe smiled, her eyes steady. We're not doing this to flatter anyone. You didn't invite us. But we've seen enough. Miguel added, after you left, no one listened to us anymore. Richard just barked orders. Charlotte doesn't understand the system and keeps forcing us to follow her lead. You don't need to prove anything to us anymore, Rachel said softly. They fired you just because you had compassion. If that's the price to survive at North Bay, we don't want to pay it. I looked around the table, a quiet warmth rising in my chest on the edge of a fall that hadn't yet turned to winter. I thought I had lost everything. But it turns out what I had spent years protecting was still intact, in the hearts of those who had once stood beside me. I took a deep breath and nodded. If you're ready, we won't rebuild the old. We'll build something better, cleaner, more honest, and more trustworthy. Ethan leaned forward. So, do you have a plan yet? I do, I replied. Marshall wants me to rebuild the entire operations system for the Western region. I'm not replicating the old model. I want a more connected team. Each person should have a real voice, not just be a name on a payroll. Miguel nodded. Give me a role tied to system data, but also give me the power to propose improvements. We want to work, Zoe said firmly, but we don't want to be stepped on. I trust you won't let that happen again. I looked at them, my hand resting on the now cold teacup. These weren't just former employees. They were witnesses to a time when I believed, when I fought, when I was betrayed. And now they were choosing to walk forward with me, not for position but for purpose. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Jamie and Leo walked in quietly as always, both carrying document envelopes. I smiled gently and stood. You too as well. Jamie nodded. There's nothing left to discuss. The way they treated you showed us clearly, North Bay chose money over people. I choose people. Leo slid his folder toward me. They can keep the titles, but they lost trust. You're the opposite. I counted 7 people. The names I once placed my trust in now returning, not to get even but to rebuild. To do it right. I sat back down, lowering my voice but keeping it steady. I won't promise this will be easy. We're starting from scratch, no safety net. But if you're with me, I won't let anyone bow their head for choosing what's right. Each pair of eyes met mine, wordless but resolute. In that moment I knew, what once broke me, was now the beginning of something no one had dared to dream. And we, the ones labeled not flexible enough, were about to rewrite the rules. Less than 3 weeks after our team officially joined Evelyn X, the atmosphere at the Portland headquarters had transformed. No more cautious footsteps. Morning meetings became energized, buzzing with a kind of optimism I never once felt at North Bay. No one had to fake enthusiasm. They were simply doing the work they loved, in a place where people's worth was genuinely seen. Each day started with a quick sync. Miguel led operations for the Seattle sector, Zoe handled customer data across Central Oregon, and Ethan had begun reworking the inventory procedures in preparation for our expansion into California. We weren't trying to make a statement to the market. But the shift spoke for itself. In just 2 weeks, 3 major clients, Pacific Wind, Kane Tech, and Horizon Link, reached out on their own, asking to move their logistics contracts to Evelyn X. They never mentioned Richard or Charlotte. They just said they wanted to work with a team they trusted. I didn't need to ask further. I knew why they came. A message from Marshall hit my inbox that Tuesday morning, short but loaded. 3 contracts in 10 days. You're making waves. I smiled quietly. No need for recognition right now. We had plenty of work ahead. By the end of week 3, a courier envelope arrived at Evelyn X, stamped in red from North Bay's legal department. It was addressed to me. Inside was a formal demand that I and my entire former team cease working for Evelyn X immediately, citing a 6-month non-compete clause, and threatening legal action if there was any evidence of client poaching. I brought the file to Vincent, the regional counsel for Evelyn X. He'd spent 15 years in litigation dismantling employment contracts just like this one. When I handed him the documents, he skimmed a few pages, then raised an eyebrow. They're still pulling this tired routine? I thought they were too busy trying to survive their current mess, I said lightly. Vincent chuckled, tapping his finger on the desk. I read your old contract when Marshall first brought up your name. That non-compete is vague and weakly written. But more importantly, the reason they let you go is the key factor here. He paused, locking eyes with me. Firing someone for taking bereavement leave? That's a serious ethical violation in any legal system. What can we do? We don't need to do anything. If they file, I'll hit back hard. If they don't, we continue as planned. But between us, Vincent slid the documents back into the envelope. They won't push this far. They're already standing in a wildfire. That very afternoon, internal emails at Everlyn X lit up with links to trade publications. One article from Logistics Now ran with the headline, "Why did North Bay's entire ops leadership walk out together?" Another from Freightline Weekly was even more direct. The fallout of a cold decision, firing over bereavement leave sparks staff exodus. I skimmed through quotes from former clients, anonymous North Bay staff and industry analysts. No one mentioned me by name, but every line revolved around one unmistakable figure. My departure had triggered a collapse they couldn't stop. One quote from an unnamed source made me pause. They didn't just lose people. They lost the compass. Zoe sent me a screenshot of a text from an old friend still at North Bay. Richard had just finished a 2-hour closed-door meeting with the board. No conclusions were shared. But within an hour, all internal emails referencing me were ordered deleted from North Bay's servers. Scrubbing the evidence, Zoe wrote. But it's too late. I didn't feel triumphant. There was nothing to celebrate in watching a place that was once home rot from the inside. But something settled within me, a sense of justice that didn't need to scream. We didn't retaliate with fire. We didn't strike back with cruelty. We just did the work, where kindness wasn't treated like weakness. That night I sat alone in my office. The light dimmed to a soft glow. The Western Region expansion plan was open on my screen. Outside, early autumn winds rustled the trees by the river, carrying the scent of dry grass and soil. I wondered whether anyone on the other side of town, still at North Bay, sat alone like this. And if so, whether they were thinking about what had once connected us, now being rebuilt here in a place led with humanity. I was reviewing the quarterly operations report when the office phone rang. Not an internal number. No caller ID. I hesitated a few seconds, then picked up, keeping my voice steady. My name is Arabelle. I'm Samuel Grant, CEO of North Bay. His voice was deep, clear, trying to sound calm. Thanks for answering. I know this is sudden, but we need to talk. I didn't respond right away. Samuel was someone I'd met only once at a client conference in San Francisco, where he spoke for 15 minutes about the value of people but then skimmed past the operations team as if they didn't exist. I'd never heard him mention my name. But today, his tone carried an urgency I'd never heard from North Bay's top floors. We want to discuss the possibility of you coming back, he continued. At double your previous salary. With the authority to rebuild the department you once led. I leaned back in my chair, my hands still resting on the file. I wasn't angry. But I felt sorry for how they thought everything could be solved with money. I'm not lacking work, Mr. Grant, I said slowly. And I'm certainly not lacking respect where I'm working now. I understand. But what happened to you is a mistake. A serious mistake, he replied. We were not fully informed of the decision to terminate you. It was handled internally. If I had known, I would have intervened. Are you talking about the decision Richard made? I asked. Samuel sighed. Yes. We've just suspended him. There are irregularities in the accounting and budgeting systems. We're conducting an internal investigation. I stayed silent for a long moment. Richard's face came to mind, cold, arrogant, confident enough to believe his actions would never be uncovered. I wasn't surprised. But I wasn't satisfied either. I'm not surprised he's under investigation, I said. I once received a copy of an internal financial report showing misallocated funds. But at the time I chose to leave. Not because I lacked evidence, but because I had no reason to stay. Samuel tried to keep his tone persuasive. We can start over. You can build your team the way you want. We'll fully support you. I let out a small laugh. I built that team. And you pushed me out without a word. They followed me not because I ordered them to, but because they knew I wouldn't betray people to keep my position. I understand how you feel, but consider the impact you could make if you came back. No salary can make up for a lack of humanity, I said firmly. And no system is worth trusting again when the leaders only fix mistakes by buying people off. There was silence on the other end of the line. Long after he spoke again. If you change your mind. I'm not changing my mind. And you should ask yourself. If I did come back, how is what you're saying today different from the lies Richard used to cover his mistakes? I hung up. No anger. No bitterness. Just nothing left to prove. That evening, Zoe sent me a message. Richard's access to the system has been revoked. I hear the board received a report from an independent auditor. I set my phone down on the desk, looking at the light spilling out from the office across the glass. Ethan and Miguel were still working with the rollout team in California. Each was doing the right role, matching their skills. No one having to back down for power games. One day North Bay might rebuild. But not with me. Not with the people who were once forced to choose between honor and survival. Because once trust is lost, no budget is big enough to buy it back. 4 months after our team officially joined Everlyn X, everything changed faster than even I expected. On a morning early in the 5th month, during the quarterly executive meeting, Marshall stood after my presentation and declared plainly, "We are witnessing an operational miracle in the Western region. As of today, Arabelle Monroe is officially appointed Chief Operating Officer for the entire region." No thunderous applause. No grand celebration. Just proud eyes from familiar faces seated around the table. Zoe smiled softly, Rachel nodded quietly, and Ethan leaned over to nudge Miguel like two kids watching their sister win a basketball trophy. I said nothing then. Just looked at each of them, seeing clearly they were not only happy for me, they were proud that our team's effort had been recognized. Sleepless nights, calls across time zones, stepping up to solve client crises without waiting for me to ask. Every one of them had pushed beyond their limits. As I left the meeting room, Portland's sky was just clearing after days of rain. I stood alone on the 7th floor hallway, looking toward the distant Columbia River twisting like a silver ribbon. The breeze carried the scent of damp wood and early summer leaves. I thought of my father, the man who taught me how to read a topographic map when I was 12, who said, "You don't have to be the loudest person. Just the one who keeps the right direction in the wind." That afternoon, I invited the whole team to my home, a simple but cozy apartment overlooking the river. No agenda. Just a light meal, some craft apple cider Rachel brought, a few Mexican dishes Miguel's mother sent from California. Ethan put on soft, instrumental piano music. No talk of numbers or expansion strategies. Everyone sat around the wooden porch as the afternoon light filtered through the trees, turning Zoe's braided hair golden. "I feel like we've just gone through a migration," Zoe said, her glass raised, eyes distant. "Leaving the old place without knowing what waits ahead. But now, everything feels worth it." Rachel softly added, "We were at North Bay for years but never really had power. Here we're not just heard, we're trusted." Miguel set his glass down and leaned back in his chair. "And protected. For the first time in my logistics career, I don't feel like the last to take the blame." I didn't interrupt. I just quietly listened to each of them, feeling a deep relief. Not pride, not satisfaction, but a profound lightness after years of struggling to survive. Before the sun fully set, I invited everyone down to the riverbank. I carried a small basket filled with white daisies I'd ordered from the flower shop my mother once loved. Everyone walked quietly after me. No explanations needed. They understood. I handed each person a single flower. No words were spoken. We stood side by side on the soft earth where the water flowed peacefully. "I didn't hold a big funeral for my father," I began, my voice low and steady, "because it all happened too suddenly. But he was the first person to teach me about resilience, about kindness in the choices we make, even when it costs us. And today, looking back, I want to thank him. Because thanks to him, I know there's no greater victory than staying true to yourself." I lowered my head, letting the white daisy float gently on the water. The petals drifted slowly, circling once before fading in the late afternoon sun. Zoe stepped beside me, her hand lightly touching my shoulder. "You kept your promise," she said. "Not by fighting back with anger but by rebuilding with kindness." The whole group released their flowers. 7 white daisies floated downstream, a silent farewell to the man who quietly stood behind me throughout my childhood. I knew he would smile, not for the title I had just earned but for how I passed through pain without losing my humanity. When we returned home, Zoe handed me a small box. Inside was an old compass, its brass casing scratched but the needle still true. "We bought it from an antique shop," Rachel said with a soft smile. "To remind you, you're the one who's always guided us." I looked at the compass, a wave of unspoken emotion tightening in my chest. In life, sometimes not everyone gets to go where they want. But if you can be the anchor for those searching for direction, maybe that journey means more than any finish line. One quiet morning in early April, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. The air was still crisp, a thin mist blurred the window panes, and the city seemed not yet fully awake. As I entered the 8th floor reception, I noticed a small package on the desk with my name handwritten in blue ink on the label. I took the box to my office, carefully unwrapped each layer of paper. Inside was a small potted cactus so familiar it left me speechless. The pale blue ceramic pot was chipped on one corner, the soil slightly dry, but the plant was still alive, though its leaves had turned a light brown at the base. At the bottom of the box lay a simple card, written in handwriting I instantly recognized. "Arabelle, I found this after they cleared out the 6th floor. I thought it belonged back here. Even though you're no longer here, your work is still talked about. Stay strong. Kelly, receptionist." I placed the cactus on the windowsill where the morning light had just begun to spill in, then stood quietly for a moment, my hand brushing the cool ceramic. Over the past 9 months, we had accomplished the unexpected. Expanding distribution to Nevada, signing 3 strategic contracts with major retail chains, and creating a culture where everyone was called by their true name and recognized fairly for their effort. But nothing moved me more than this little plant. A piece of the past thought forgotten, now returned quietly and whole. 2 days later, an industry newsletter arrived in my inbox from Logistics America. North Bay Freight announced dissolution after a prolonged divestment process. The company's assets were taken over by Meridian Freight Systems. The article was less than 500 words without naming anyone. No one stood up to defend the decisions once called operational strategy. No one took responsibility for the ongoing losses. But I didn't need the press to speak for me. Truth doesn't need to shout to exist. It simply stands there waiting for the crooked to collapse on their own. That afternoon, I drove out of the city without telling anyone, carrying only a small bag, a bottle of water, and a light jacket. I stopped at the spot my father had taught me to fish as a child. A quiet river bend under an old iron bridge with no signs, no tourists, just tall grass and the gentle sound of flowing water. I sat on the rock he used to sit on, eyes watching the rippling water stirred by the wind. The river was the same, unchanging, quiet, never stopping for even a second. I remembered his eyes each time he taught me patience. He didn't speak much but always left me with one last phrase: "Be like the rocks, my child. Let the current pass but never lose your shape." I picked up a small stone and tossed it into the water. The splash was crisp and round before dissolving into a series of ripples. I felt no anger, no triumph, just the feeling that I had come full circle, from being cast out and surrounded by silence to finding a voice that didn't need to raise its tone. Zoe once said, "You don't need to destroy them for revenge. You just need to do better so everyone sees what really matters." And now, looking back, I see more clearly than ever that what I once dreamed of wasn't status, not winning or losing, but building a place where no one has to sacrifice their conscience to survive. Where kindness is never seen as weakness. Where people can work as their truest selves. I pulled out my phone, took a photo of the river. No filter, no edits, and hit record, speaking a sentence I never sent. I chose to stand steady as the current passed, and because of that, I'm still here. As I left the riverbank, afternoon was turning toward evening. On the seat beside me, the small cactus leaned gently toward the light. I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing nothing but trees swaying softly, a gentle breeze, and a long streak of sunlight stretching across the road. No applause needed. No other conclusion required. Just that quiet knowing that I hadn't lost myself. And for me, that was enough. If you've listened this far, you may have faced moments like mine, when you're pushed to the sidelines by those you once trusted most, and silence is all that remains amidst devotion. So what would you do? Choose to destroy everything to prove injustice, or quietly move forward and build something better from within. I don't claim my choice is the only right one. I only know that for me, holding on to kindness brought me to a place where I truly belong. And if you've ever been cast out, forced to stand alone in the storm, please share your story. I want to listen. Because sometimes, the smallest things we think don't matter are what give others the courage to keep going. Thank you for taking the time to hear my journey. If this story touched a part of your life, please leave a comment below. And if you want to continue this journey with me through more stories about life, family, faith, and resilience, hit subscribe so you won't miss what's meaningful ahead. Because every journey, whether painful or gentle, deserves to be told.